When 7-year-old Emily Hartwell whispered this to Princess Diana, it shattered her royal facade forever. What happened next in that hospital room would haunt Diana for the rest of her life, but also give her the courage to become the people's princess the world fell in love with. Hit subscribe to hear more untold Diana stories, and let me know in the comments what you think about this incredible moment. It was November 15th, 1991, and Princess Diana was running late for what should have been a routine royal engagement at Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was rushing to comfort sick children while her own world was falling apart behind palace walls. Just that morning, she'd had another devastating phone conversation with Charles, their voices cold and distant as they discussed arrangements for the boys' Christmas holidays. Each word had felt like another nail in the coffin of their marriage. The newspapers were full of speculation about their relationship, and Diana knew it was only a matter of time before the fairy tale facade crumbled completely. Diana sat in the back of her Rolls-Royce, checking her appearance in a small compact mirror one final time. The reflection staring back at her was flawless, perfectly applied makeup, not a hair out of place, that practiced smile ready to deploy at a moment's notice. But Diana knew what the mirror couldn't show: the growing emptiness inside, the constant ache in her chest, the feeling that she was slowly disappearing beneath the weight of royal expectations. She'd barely eaten that morning, the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach making food impossible to consider. The eating disorder that had plagued her for years was getting worse. Another secret she had to hide beneath layers of royal composure. Sometimes she wondered if anyone would notice if she simply vanished entirely, or if they'd just find someone else to wave and smile in her place. "Your Royal Highness, we've arrived," announced her protection officer James as the car pulled up to the hospital's main entrance. Through the tinted windows, Diana could see the familiar sight: photographers jostling for position, hospital administrators waiting nervously in their best suits, and the ever-present red carpet that would guide her every step. Diana took a deep breath and transformed. The exhausted, troubled woman became Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales. The smile appeared, the posture straightened, and the performance began. "Your Royal Highness, what an honor!" gushed Dr. Margaret Wells, the hospital's chief pediatric oncologist, as she greeted Diana at the entrance. "The children are absolutely thrilled you're here." Diana shook hands warmly, said all the right words, asked all the appropriate questions. She'd done this hundreds of times before. Visit the children, bring some joy, pose for photos, leave everyone feeling that they'd experienced something special. It was a role she could play in her sleep. But as they walked through the hospital corridors, something felt different. Maybe it was the weight of her own troubles. Maybe it was the growing realization that her marriage was truly over. But Diana found herself really looking at the children for the first time in months. They moved from room to room, Diana dutifully bringing smiles to young faces, signing autographs, and listening to parents express their gratitude. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned until they reached the oncology ward's family room. That's where she saw her. Emily Hartwell was 7 years old, though she looked younger. The leukemia had taken her hair, leaving her pale scalp covered by a colorful silk scarf that somehow made her enormous blue eyes even more striking. She was sitting in a wheelchair, not because she couldn't walk, but because the treatment had left her too weak to stand for long periods. Emily came from one of England's oldest aristocratic families. Her father, Lord Hartwell, owned vast estates in the Cotswolds, and her mother had been presented at court during her own debutante season. Under normal circumstances, Emily would have grown up attending the same social functions as the royal family, learning to curtsy and speak in the refined tones of the upper class. Instead, she'd spent the last 8 months learning the names of chemotherapy drugs and the schedules of radiation treatments. Despite everything she'd endured, Emily maintained the impeccable manners of her upbringing. She wrote thank you notes to every nurse in careful cursive handwriting, said please and thank you even when she was too weak to lift her head, and never once complained about the pain that Diana could see flickering behind her composed expression. In many ways, Emily's brave performance reminded Diana of her own daily struggle to maintain dignity under impossible circumstances. What struck Diana immediately was that Emily wasn't looking at her with the usual mixture of awe and excitement that most children displayed when meeting a real princess. Instead, Emily was studying her with an intensity that made Diana suddenly self-conscious. There was something ancient in those young eyes, as if illness had aged her soul far beyond her years. "Emily, darling," Dr. Wells said gently, "this is Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales." Emily performed a small curtsy from her wheelchair, as proper as any aristocrat's daughter should be. "Your Royal Highness," she said in a voice that was startlingly mature for her age, "I'm frightfully pleased to meet you." Diana knelt down to Emily's level, as she always did with children. "Hello, Emily. Dr. Wells tells me you're the bravest girl in the whole hospital." For a moment, Emily said nothing. She continued to study Diana's face with those penetrating blue eyes. Then, in a voice so quiet that Diana had to lean closer to hear, Emily said something that changed everything. "Your Royal Highness," Emily whispered, "you're rather sad like me, aren't you?" The words hit Diana like a physical blow. In all her years of royal engagements, through hundreds of carefully orchestrated meetings, no one had ever seen through her performance so completely. She found herself frozen, kneeling there in front of this dying child who had somehow looked past the perfect hair, the flawless makeup, and the practiced smile to see the pain that Diana thought she'd hidden so well. What makes you say that?" Diana managed to whisper back. Emily's thin hand reached out and gently touched Diana's face, right below her left eye. "You have the same look in your eyes that I do when I pretend not to be scared. Mummy and Papa think I don't know I'm dying, but I do. And I think maybe you're pretending too, aren't you?" Diana felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. She glanced around the room, suddenly aware of the cameras, the watching staff, the other children and families. This wasn't supposed to be happening. She was supposed to be bringing comfort, not receiving it from a 7-year-old girl who was fighting for her life. "Emily," Diana said, her voice barely audible, "what makes you think—" "Because," Emily interrupted gently, "when someone is really happy, they don't have to work so hard at smiling. Your smile is beautiful, Your Royal Highness, but it doesn't reach your eyes. Not like when you looked at that baby in the other ward. That smile was real." Diana felt tears beginning to form and knew she had to regain control. But Emily wasn't finished. "I heard Papa talking to Dr. Wells," Emily continued, her small voice carrying a wisdom that seemed impossible at her age. "He said sometimes grown-ups hurt worse than children because they have to pretend everything is all right even when it isn't. Is that what you have to do?" Diana looked into this child's eyes and saw something she hadn't expected to find: understanding. Not pity, not curiosity, but genuine recognition of shared pain. For the first time in months, Diana felt truly seen. Without thinking about protocol or propriety, Diana took Emily's small hand in both of hers. "Sometimes," she whispered, "it feels like I'm disappearing little by little, and nobody notices because I keep smiling." Emily nodded gravely. "I know that feeling. Some days I feel like I'm already a ghost, and everyone's just pretending I'm still here." The honesty of the moment was overwhelming. Diana had never spoken so openly with anyone about how isolated she felt, how the constant performance was slowly erasing who she really was. And here was this dying child, offering her a kind of understanding that none of the adults in her life had ever provided. In the months leading up to this moment, Diana had felt increasingly suffocated by the walls of royal protocol. Every gesture was scrutinized, every emotion dissected by the press. She'd learned to exist in a state of perpetual performance, never quite sure where the real Diana ended and the Princess of Wales began. The loneliness had become so profound that she sometimes stood in rooms full of people and felt like she was watching her life from the outside, disconnected from her own experiences. But here in this sterile hospital room, with this remarkable child who had nothing left to lose, Diana felt a connection that cut through all the pretense. Emily's honesty was like oxygen to someone who had been slowly suffocating. "Emily," Diana said softly, "aren't you frightened?" Emily considered the question seriously, her small face grave with concentration. "Sometimes, but not of dying, really. I'm more frightened of being forgotten, of not mattering, of having lived 7 years and not making any difference at all." The words hit Diana like a revelation. Here was a child facing death with more courage than Diana had shown facing life. Emily's fear wasn't about ending. It was about never having truly existed, never having mattered to anyone. It was a fear Diana recognized in her own soul. Diana felt something shift inside her chest. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've already made a difference. You've made me feel less alone than I have in years." For the first time since they'd started talking, Emily smiled, a genuine, bright smile that transformed her entire face. "Really, Your Royal Highness." "Really, and Emily, you don't have to call me Your Royal Highness anymore. My friends call me Diana." "Diana," Emily repeated as if testing how it felt. "That's a lovely name, like the huntress goddess, strong and independent." Diana laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in weeks. "How do you know about Diana the Huntress?" "I read everything," Emily said proudly. "When you can't run around and play, books become your best friends. I've read about all sorts of princesses, real and imaginary. But you're the first one I've met who seemed like she might actually be real underneath all the royal bits." Diana spent the next hour talking with Emily, while the cameras rolled and the hospital staff looked on. But she'd forgotten about all of them. For those precious minutes, she wasn't performing the role of princess. She was simply Diana, talking to a remarkable little girl who had somehow given her permission to be herself. They talked about books and dreams, about what it felt like to have the whole world watching your every move, about the difference between being lonely and being alone. Emily told Diana about her secret diary, where she wrote letters to all the people she would never get to meet. Diana told Emily about feeling trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt empty within. "You know what I think?" Emily said as their visit was winding down. "I think maybe we both need to stop pretending so much. Maybe if you let people see the real Diana sometimes, you wouldn't feel so alone. And maybe if I stop pretending I'm not scared, Mummy and Papa won't have to pretend they don't know I'm dying." Diana stared at this extraordinary child. "When did you become so wise?" "I think maybe being sick makes you see things more clearly," Emily said thoughtfully. "Like when you're in a tall building and you can see the whole city spread out below. When you know your time might be short, you stop worrying about small things and start seeing what really matters." As Diana prepared to leave, Emily reached into a small bag beside her wheelchair and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. "I made this for you," Emily said, carefully unwrapping a small bracelet made of colorful beads. "Each bead represents something different. This blue one is for tears that need to be cried. This yellow one is for real laughter. This red one is for courage. And this clear one is for being honest about who you really are." Diana's hands trembled as she accepted the gift. "Emily, this is beautiful, but I can't—" "Please," Emily said firmly. "I want you to have it, and I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll try to be the real Diana sometimes, not just the princess version. The world needs to see that even princesses can be sad and scared and still be brave." Diana tied the bracelet around her wrist with shaking hands. "I promise, Emily. I promise I'll try." As Diana's entourage prepared to move on to the next ward, Emily caught her hand one more time. "Diana," she whispered, "thank you for letting me be real with you today. It's the first time in weeks I haven't felt like I was disappearing." Diana knelt down and hugged Emily gently. "Thank you for seeing me, Emily. Really seeing me." 3 weeks later, Diana received word that Emily Hartwell had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her parents found a letter addressed to "my friend Diana" on Emily's bedside table. The letter read, "Dear Diana, I hope you're remembering to be real sometimes. I want you to know that our talk that day made me feel like I mattered, like my thoughts and feelings were important, even though I'm just a sick little girl. You helped me realize that being honest about being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave. I hope you can remember that too. Please don't let them turn you back into just a princess. The world needs the real Diana. Love, your friend Emily." Diana kept Emily's letter in her private study for the rest of her life. More importantly, she kept her promise. That hospital meeting marked the beginning of Diana's transformation from dutiful royal to authentic advocate. She began speaking more openly about her own struggles, connecting with people on a human level rather than maintaining royal distance. The change didn't happen overnight. For weeks after Emily's death, Diana found herself struggling with guilt. How could she complain about her privileged life when she'd met a child who faced death with such grace. But gradually, she began to understand that Emily hadn't wanted her to minimize her pain. She'd wanted her to acknowledge it, to stop pretending it didn't exist. Diana started small. During private charity visits, she began having real conversations instead of just exchanging pleasantries. She sat with AIDS patients when their families had abandoned them, holding their hands without gloves at a time when fear and misinformation ran rampant. She talked to homeless teenagers about their struggles, sharing pieces of her own story of feeling lost and unwanted. The bracelet Emily made stayed on Diana's wrist for months afterward, hidden beneath her sleeves during official engagements, but visible during her private charity work. Staff members noticed that something had changed in the princess after that hospital visit. She seemed more present, more genuinely engaged with the people she met. Her private secretary noted that Diana had stopped asking for detailed briefings about the people she was meeting, preferring instead to discover their stories naturally through conversation. Palace officials were initially concerned about this shift. Diana was becoming less predictable, more likely to go off script, more willing to show emotion in public. But the public response was overwhelmingly positive. People sensed the authenticity in Diana's interactions and responded to it with unprecedented warmth and affection. Years later, when Diana gave her famous Panorama interview, where she spoke honestly about her marriage, her eating disorder, and her struggles with royal life, she was wearing Emily's bracelet. In that moment, she was finally keeping her promise to a 7-year-old girl who had seen her pain and offered her friendship instead of pity. Dr. Margaret Wells, who witnessed that first meeting between Diana and Emily, later said, "I've seen Princess Diana meet hundreds of children over the years, but that encounter was different. Both of them walked away, changed. Emily died knowing she had mattered to someone important, and Diana learned that being vulnerable didn't make her weak, it made her human." Today, there's a small garden at Great Ormond Street Hospital named in Emily Hartwell's honor. The plaque reads, "For Emily, who taught us that true strength comes from honest hearts." Diana attended the dedication ceremony, and those who were there said it was one of the few times they ever saw the princess cry in public. The story of Diana and Emily Hartwell reminds us that sometimes the most powerful healing happens when we stop pretending to be perfect and start allowing ourselves to be real. A dying 7-year-old girl saw through the facade of the world's most famous woman and offered her the one thing she needed most: permission to be human. Emily's wisdom, that authenticity is more powerful than perfection, became a guiding principle for Diana's later charity work. She began visiting AIDS patients when it was still controversial, walked through minefields to draw attention to a humanitarian crisis, and spoke openly about mental health at a time when such discussions were taboo for royals. In each of these moments, Diana was keeping her promise to a little girl who taught her that being real was the greatest gift she could give the world. Emily Hartwell lived only 7 years, but in that brief time, she changed the course of a princess's life and, through Diana's transformation, touched millions of others. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. Sometimes a child's honesty can shatter years of careful pretense. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to show our real selves to the world, we discover that our struggles were never meant to be carried alone. Princess Diana learned this lesson in a hospital room from a dying child who saw her tears and offered friendship instead of reverence. It was the beginning of Diana's journey from royal performance to human connection, a transformation that made her beloved not because she was perfect, but because she dared to be real. If this incredible story of compassion and authenticity moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of being genuine in a world that often demands perfection. Have you ever met someone who saw through your facade and offered you real connection? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the heart behind the crown.